There are many philosophers who build a philosophical foundation of education. One of the philosophical foundation of education is progressivism. And one of the best known proponent of progressivism, the man behind the progress of education, is John Dewey. Let me showcase his life. Dewey's early life. Dewey was born on October 20, 1859, to Archibald Dewey and Lucina Artemisia Rich in Burlington, Vermont. He was the third of the couple's four sons, one of whom died as an infant. Dewey's mother, the daughter of a wealthy farmer, was a devout Calvinist. His father, a merchant, left his grocery business to become a Union Army soldier in the Civil War. Dewey's father was known to share his passion for British literature with his offspring. After the war, Archibald became the proprietor of a successful tobacco shop, affording the family a comfortable life and financial stability. Growing up, Dewey attended Burlington Public Schools, excelling as a student. When he was just 15 years old, he enrolled at the University of Vermont, where he particularly enjoyed studying philosophy under the tutelage of H.A.P. Tarry. 4 years later, Dewey graduated from the University of Vermont, second in his class. Dewey's teaching career. The autumn after Dewey graduated, his cousin landed him a teaching job at a seminary in Oil City, Pennsylvania. 2 years later, Dewey lost the position when his cousin resigned as principal of the seminary. After being laid off, Dewey went back to Vermont and started teaching at a private school in Vermont. During his free time, he read philosophical treatises and discussed them with his former teacher, Thari. As his fascination with the topic grew, Dewey decided to take a break from teaching in order to study philosophy and psychology at Johns Hopkins. George Sylvester Morris and J. Stanley Hall were among the teachers who influenced Dewey most. Upon receiving his doctorate from Johns Hopkins in 1884, Dewey was hired as an assistant professor at the University of Michigan. At Michigan, he met Harriet Alice Chipman, and the two married in 1886. Over the course of their marriage, they would give birth to 6 children and adopt 1 child. In 1888, Dewey and his family left Michigan for the University of Minnesota, where he was a professor of philosophy. However, within a year, they chose to return to the University of Michigan, where Dewey taught for the next 5 years. By 1894, Dewey was made head of the philosophy department at the University of Chicago. He remained at the University of Chicago until 1904, also serving as director of its School of Education for 2 years. Dewey left Chicago in 1904 to join the Ivy League, becoming a professor of philosophy at Columbia University while working at Teachers College on the side. In 1930, Dewey left Columbia and retired from his teaching career with the title of Professor Emeritus. His wife, Harriet, had died 3 years earlier. Dewey's philosophy. Dewey's philosophical treatises were at first inspired by his reading of philosopher and psychologist William James' writing. Dewey's philosophy, known as experimentalism or instrumentalism, largely centered on human experience, rejecting the more rigid ideas of transcendentalism to which Dewey had been exposed in academia. It viewed ideas as tools for experimenting with the goal of improving the human experience. Dewey's philosophy also claimed that man behaved out of habit and that change often led to unexpected outcomes. As man struggled to understand the results of change, he was forced to think creatively in order to resume control of his shifting environment. For Dewey, thought was the means through which man came to understand and connect with the world around him. A universal education was the key to teaching people how to abandon their habits and think creatively. Dewey's education reform. Dewey was a strong proponent for progressive educational reform. He believed that education should be based on the principle of learning through those. In 1894, Dewey and his wife Harriet started their own experimental primary school, the University Elementary School at the University of Chicago. His goal was to test his educational theories, but Dewey resigned when the university president fired Harriet. In 1919, Dewey, along with his colleagues Charles Bird, Thorstein Veblen, James Harvey Robinson, and Wesley Clare Mitchell, founded the New School for Social Research. The new school is progressive, experimental school that emphasizes the free exchange of intellectual ideas in the arts and social sciences. During the 1920s, Dewey lectured on educational reform at schools all over the world. He was particularly impressed by experiments in the Russian educational system and shared what he learned with his colleagues when he returned to the States, that education should focus mainly on students' interactions with the present. Dewey did not, however, dismiss the value of also learning about the past. In 1930s, after he retired from teaching, Dewey became an active member of numerous educational organizations, including the New York Teachers Guild and the International League for Academic Freedom. Dewey's writing. Dewey wrote his first two books of psychology in 1887 and Leibniz's new essays concerning the human understanding in 1888. When he was working at the University of Michigan over the course of his lifetime, Dewey published more than 1,000 of works, including essays, articles, and books. His writing covered a broad range of topics: psychology, philosophy, educational theory, culture, religion, and politics. Through his articles in the New York Republic, he established himself as one of the most highly regarded social commentators of his day. Dewey continued to write prolifically up until his death. Politics. While Dewey thought that a democracy was the best type of government, he believed that America's democracy was strained in the wake of the Industrial Revolution. Industrialization, he believed, had quickly created great wealth for only a few people rather than benefiting society as a whole. Viewing the major political parties as servants of big business, Dewey became president of the People's Lobby, an organization that often lobbied their own candidates in lieu of affiliating themselves with big business. In accordance with everyday people's social interest, in 1946, Dewey even attempted to help labor leaders establish a new political party, the People's Party, for the 1948 presidential elections. Later life and death. In 1946, Dewey, 87, remarried to a widow named Roberta Grant. Following their marriage, the Deweys lived off Roberta's inheritance and Dewey's book royalties. On June 1, 1952, Dewey, a lifelong supporter of educational reform and defender of rights for every man, died for pneumonia at the age of 92 in the couple's New York City apartment. In 1899, Dewey published the pamphlet that made him famous, the School and Society, and promulgated many key precepts of later education reforms. Dewey insisted that the old model of schooling, students sitting in rows, memorizing and reciting, was antiquated. Students should be active, not passive. They required compelling and relevant projects, not lectures. Students should become problem solvers. Interest, not fear, should be used to motivate them. They should cooperate and not compete. The key to the new education was manual training. Before the factory system and the growth of cities, children handled animals, crops, and tools. They were educated by nature, with real things and materials. They will lamented the disappearance of the idyllic village and the departure of children's modesty, reverence, and implicit obedience. He was, however, no reactionary It is radical conditions which have changed, and only an equally radical change in education suffices. Urban children needed to sew, cook, and work with metal and wood. Manual training should not, however, be mere vocational education or a substitute for the farm. It should be scientific and experimental, an introduction to civilization. You can concentrate the history of all mankind into the evolution of flax, cotton, and wool fibers into clothing, asserted Terry. He described a class where students handled wool and cotton. As they discovered how hard it was to separate seeds from cotton, they came to understand why their ancestors were woolen clothing. Working in groups to make models of the spinning jenny and the power loom, they learned cooperation. Together, they understood the rule of water and stream, analyzed the textile mills of Lowell, and studied the distribution of the finished cloth and its impact on everyday life. They learned science, geography, and physics without textbooks or lectures. Learning by doing replaced learning by listening. Manual training revolved around the study of occupations to develop both the hand and the intellect. To know and to do were equally valuable. Cooperative learning encouraged a democratic classroom, which promoted a democratic society without elites, ethnic divisions, or economic inequality. Throughout his life, Dewey believed that humans were social beings inclined to be cooperative, not selfish individuals predisposed to conflict. Always he praised democracy as a way of life and scientific intelligence as the key to reform. Running through the school and society is a suspicion of the intellectual who wants to monopolize knowledge and keep it abstract. They opposed the academic curriculum revolving around classical languages and high culture, which he believed suited an aristocracy, not a democracy. The simple facts of the case are that in the great majority of human beings, he wrote, the distinctively intellectual interest is not dominant. They have the so-called practical impulse and disposition. With more and more Americans enrolled in schools, educators had to acknowledge this fact. Learning had to be democratized and made relevant and practical. The school must be represent present life.